First up, we have none other than Mr. Dikshu Kukreja from CP Kukreja Architects to share his presentation on the 10 people or situations who influenced his design. So if you're all curious to find out who or what these designs or these situations were, let's find that out from our first very esteemed speaker, Mr. Dikshu Kukreja. Please put your hands together, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning, everyone. Wow, I have to say, Sri Gopal Das' talk was so motivational, so inspiring, and I would confess it's a hard act to follow, but I'm very happy to be here. And before I actually share with you the experiences, I had one thought in my mind, and that was when I was watching that video that FOAID played with those amazing architectural images with the backdrop of that music. I really had my heartbeat, I think, going 50% over. And the thought that came to my mind was that just the way now in every multiplex when you go before a movie starts, you end up standing up for the national anthem. I think the same way before any architectural event, we should have a video like that, which is so inspiring and something that makes you feel so humble as far as our role and our contribution is when you see those marvelous works that have been created. So I'll move ahead now, and what I found very interesting was that when FOAID approached me for giving a talk on these 10 people or situations that have shaped my life or influenced my design, I was actually a little taken aback, because for one, I felt I've never really had the time to look back, and I would like to believe that I'm still young enough that I should be looking forward right now rather than reminiscing of what has happened so far in my architectural journey. But then when I did think about it, it was intriguing, and they also reminded me that it was 25 years, I have my college batchmates sitting here as well, 25 years since I've got into this architectural world, so it would be a good time to really look back and see what one has gone through and what one has shaped, what the experiences that have shaped us. So really, even in the talk that we just heard a few minutes back, it's so much about what we do is that what makes us and who we are. So it's really a lot to do with the experiences and situations and people around us that start shaping what we are and what makes us who we really are. I came across this very interesting African proverb. It stayed with me for many years, and it's so true that it takes a village to raise a child. If we think we are there on our own, or we've come about and we've achieved what we have achieved is on our own, I think there could be nothing far from that. So it really takes a village to raise a child. And habit also is something very strange. It just comes so subconsciously. We don't even realize it. So habit is formed out of memory. And then what Marshall McLuhan says is that we do end up becoming what we behold. So really, in my opinion, we are the product of our relationships, our experiences, and our environment. And then design, which we all practice, is really then a reflection of ourselves. So when I dissect today the anatomy of what has shaped my design language, my influences would be the inspirational figure, the mentor. One is somebody you are inspired by, and one is somebody who guides you and takes you on a certain journey. Then, of course, there are people who you look up to, you see their influences, their achievements, and that makes a difference. And then there is obviously, nobody can deny that, a profound learning experience which we all go through. And lastly, but not least, of course, would be the environment and our context. So I'm sure many of you would not be surprised to see this slide. We have a terminology going around these days, a political dynast. I very proudly feel and believe I'm very lucky to be an architectural dynast. And like many of us, whether it's in the professions of medicine, law, architecture, there are always, you come across second generation, third generation architects. I'm sure we get influenced by our parents. In my case, it was a bit different. This, of course, for those I excuse who wouldn't recognize, is my father, CP Kukreja. In my case, I sometimes relate it to it being like a steeplechase event, that I'm participating in that steeplechase race, because at every point you cross that hurdle and you're still racing away to the finishing line. And for me, very interestingly, this gentleman here turned out to be a steeplechase hurdle at every stage, because for him, he always kept questioning me, rebuking me at times on my thoughts or dreams of becoming an architect. So when I was in school, he used to say that, you know, what it takes to even get good scores to get into college, so would you have it in you? And every challenge that he threw would mean that I would have to work towards it. I didn't realize it then, but now when I look back, there's nothing but gratitude filled in my heart, because but for that attitude and that challenges that he threw, I don't think I would be standing here before you. So in response to trying to get a good score, I ended up topping the class 12th board examinations. He threw another challenge saying that, can you actually get into a good school of architecture? Do you know how tough it is? And I ended up getting into SPA with the highest rank in the admission process. He went on to say that you know, surviving in an architecture school here is not going to be easy by any means. It wasn't, because when you're an architectural dynast, you're living through this prejudice of your professors that you have to overcome at every stage. I survived. I got a gold medal in the end. It wasn't ending. The challenges kept coming at me. He kept saying that, you know, doing it in India is one thing. Maybe because of my name, there might have been some benefits. But what about achieving something abroad? How can you get an admission there? I got through Harvard. And so it went on. It went on and on and on. And now when I look back at those 25 years, I realized, like I said, that unless those challenges had come at me, I would not have been able to achieve them in the first place. So it's been a great journey in that sense, and he has all through that journey of 25 years been the inspirational figure. And of course, more than as much as the challenges, it was his approach towards architecture, his love for nature, his love for art and culture, his love for deriving something which would be highly contextual. And these are the inspirations as he works that continue to inspire me even today. This building, incidentally, is featured in the Sir Bannister Fletcher's History of Architecture as one of the most influential 20th century creations. But everything has been done with a strong humility and just sort of an approach where you just quietly continue to work. You don't have to make announcements on those. Then came my mentor. So from this architectural education in India, and students sitting here and young architects know how we go through here the architectural education, the way it is about just learning, about preparing designs. I've always wondered, why don't we call it a design review? Why do we call it a design crit? Why does it have to be criticized? Maybe something we create can be appreciated as well. But that's the psychology that architecture is taught in here. So for me, when I went to Harvard, this kind of a statement coming on the very first day, on the very first introductory talk that the chair of urban design department gave was something I couldn't even understand, I couldn't fathom. He said, you know what, you're all going to pass. There's nothing to fear, nobody fails, because if you fail, that means we failed in selecting the best of the best. So really, everybody here comes and they pass. Nobody fails here. That's not something you generally hear in architectural colleges here. Another very interesting thing which has stayed all through my life is that he mentioned in the same talk that as students, you will, he told us, learn more from each other than any teacher, any professor that's going to impart you education here. And it was so true. What these words did was that they brought that bonding on day one itself, where we all, the group, felt that it was our design. We would all be creating our own projects, but we took total ownership for everybody's work. So this kind of education really made a big difference. And then at Harvard there itself, one came across such greats like Rem Koolhaas, Markey, Zaha Hadid was there screaming, shouting in the studios. She used to make such a spectacle. It was inspiring to see how passionate all these people are about architecture. And the kind of thoughts that they believe in. And as a result of that, you see that with their work, with their approach, with what they say, what they believe in, how society respects them. And that is something I think which is a learning for all of us here, that how do we, as we architects in the community, keep talking about, sharing our concerns, that how can we actually make a difference? How can we, what we believe in, be heard out there by society and people take this seriously? And these are the thoughts of these people. And their works, of course, which are so inspiring. And then came the profound learning experience. Of course, Harvard was one, but before Harvard is that how did I really get into architecture? Somehow there was always something within me that drew me towards it. And even as a child, I loved visiting monuments. It just gave me a big thrill, going, visiting these monuments, capturing images, looking at them differently, counting patterns, etc. It's always been extremely, extremely fascinating. So that was one of those. And then the big game changer, I would say, was also getting into Frank Lloyd Wright School of Architecture, Taliesin. Now, for those who would not have heard of it or don't know about how it works, it's very interesting because they select only 35 students, only 35 at a single time in this institution from around the world. And there are 35 faculty members, again from around the world. And Frank Lloyd Wright's philosophy is learning by doing. So when I arrived there, this was somebody who had been brought up in a protected environment where one had not even prepared a sandwich for oneself or even used a scissor, use a knife to cut a fruit. And you arrive at this place where everything you need to do it yourself. So they give you 7 days in which they give you shelter, but after 7 days, you are out in the middle of the desert. In those 7 days, you need to prepare your own shelter. Now, it can be a wooden timber shelter, it can be a tent, it can be whatever you can make. That was the first time in my life that I realized that we make these fancy images which are there in that other hall, and we create these marvelous images. But to actually build it is another art altogether. So for me, what I could barely manage was just a tent in those 7 days over my head. So that experience was amazing. And that wasn't all. Taliesin was about, you had to take turns for cooking for 70 people. You had to take turns in gardening, in maintenance of the campus, and so on, to the point that even you had to participate in the choir and sing. Now, while I managed to do all the other things, good, bad, average, below average, but the one thing that I could not do and have never been able to do in my life is sing. So it was quite a challenge because first they put me in the choir, they thought maybe I could be in the side of the bass, but then they thought this voice is horrible, maybe it needs to go to tenor. I checked out in the tenor section and they could not figure out that where this guy could actually sing. But like Gaur Gopal Das was talking about, these failures also really teach you a lot. I mean, they are experiences at the end of the day, and that experience at Taliesin was something that really shaped me as a person, and therefore, I guess, also my approach to work. Of course, Frank Lloyd Wright's philosophies, as you all know about organic architecture, is something so powerful, which also made a difference. So this is all about learning by doing there that one experienced. Then there was this other interesting experience which has really had a strong influence on me, and that was Paris. So after US, it was always my first love to actually go and study or work in Italy or Europe, but I ended up really going to Paris. And I had applied to various architecture offices in the US, in Europe, but that was not the best time, so there was no job coming through. But this excitement of going to another continent, another country, somewhere where I didn't know a single person, I didn't know the language, I didn't know anyone there. I just thought it was very exciting at that age of 24, 25. It was just amazing. So I landed up in this beautiful city, and that was also an experience that I cannot forget. So what used to happen was that I got a job with this architect. He said that, look, I'm not really hiring, but you seem to be, coming from an interesting culture and all of that, and so I'll give you a job. I'm really going to pay you literally nothing, but I'm going to, in turn, give you an experience that you're going to remember. At least for the first 3 months, you will hardly earn anything. If you're up for it, the job is yours. I thought, yeah, why not? At least some job is in my hand, so I'll take it. So what I did was I lived very close to this monument, but this was literally my accommodation. I could not afford anything better. I had what they call there the maid's chambers, that room in the attic, which is very, very small, smaller than the servant quarters that we design in Gurgaon in these apartments. A very small room, even without a cupboard. There was no cupboard there, so it was literally living out of a suitcase. And that monument I showed you before, Sacré-Cœur, was close to my house, so you couldn't be sitting in this pigeonhole for too long. So I would go up, sit on those steps, watch the beautiful twilight, watch the sunset, watch the city come alive with lights. On a weekend, have the treat of carrying a bottle of wine and sitting there. Few hours, tourists would come, tourists would go, and that kept happening. Spend a few hours there, and it was just an amazing experience. So much one learned, which one didn't realize one was learning back then, but which has stayed on. And as far as the promise of the architect goes, he lived up to his promise. There's no doubt about it. And he literally drove me. He was a very rich man, by the way. He literally drove me all across the country, and he would take me every weekend, every Friday afternoon we would be out, and he would take me to these different places all across France, and every weekend almost we were traveling. And I thought that was an experience that no money can buy. It was such an amazing experience. And by the way, an interesting story on that one. One day he told me that, look, I'm going to take you to the farmhouse of my cousin. We are going to go there and spend the weekend there. You'll get to see a farm life as well. I thought, very interesting. I thought maybe it's a 2-acre, 5-acre farm like Ghitorni and Satbari or something like that. So when I reached there, he said, oh, the farm begins here. And we kept driving for the next 15, 20 minutes. It was all that man's farm. And the farm was only a small piece of land of 7,000 acres. And his cousin happened to be the owner of Lacoste. The man who started Lacoste was his cousin who owned this farm where we spent the weekend. It was all these experiences of just seeing what life was there like, the nature, the beauty, and the amount of diversity that you see in a country. When you live there for a long period, you realize how diverse, you have these preconceptions about a country, but when you spend more time there, you realize how varied it is and how many layers it has within itself. And then there was the experience of working with Kevin Roche, an American architect, and there I realized how for architects, of course we have all built models and worked with models all our life, but Kevin Roche had this amazing approach of building massive models. So he would build models which would be going 20, 25, 30 feet up there, and that's where you actually really get that sense or feel a building. You see it from all aspects, you see it from all angles, so that was an amazing experience. So I'll now conclude with, after all that journey around different continents, now when one came back and started practice here, you realize that it's a different world. And I remember that my father mentioned that, look, give yourself a year if it works well for you here, otherwise go back. And I thought to myself also before coming, I had made up my mind that I somehow had psyched myself so much to believe that, it's going to be not so good here. It's going to be so tough that I psyched myself to the point that when I came, that year ended up being very difficult, and the adjustment became very difficult. But because the psyche was so strong about the fact that you could take on anything, that one survived. And slowly you start realizing that things work in a certain way. And one secret that I told myself was that I'm not going to complain and say, oh, this country is like that, this country is like that, because hey, it is your own country to begin with. And who asked you to come back in the first place? If you don't like it, you can very well live anywhere else. So that's not something which wanted to come on my lips. And I sort of absorb myself here. But having lived here now so long and practicing here, I realized that it is another environment, it's another world, but it's also, and the issues here are so different. And what we need to realize is, and the opportunities here are, I think, unparalleled. There are far greater opportunities to contribute here than anywhere else in the world. But what we see is that our urban areas are in a state of catastrophic decline. And I think there is so much that we can do. There is so much to be done. And every aspect of our built and unbuilt environment needs huge attention. I'm not saying attention, huge attention. So there is so much that we can do. And this is something I think many of us architects have heard, some of us probably believe in. I certainly do, that we are there to shape our buildings, and then I'm sure these buildings really shape us. So thank you.